You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove and in part by JFQ Lending. All your home purchase and refinance needs should be handled by a Buckeye. You'll never pay for your appraisal with these guys. Licensed in 33 states and more on the way. Check them out at jfqlending.com. For the latest news, notes, analysis, and discussion, check us out on buckeyegrove.com and follow us on Twitter at UnscriptedOhio1. Now, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Ma! Can we get some meatloaf?
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Ma! The meatloaf!
Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
Yes, I do have a case of the Mondays. Thank you for joining me back here on the Unscripted Ohio Podcast. If you are listening, it means your ticker survived the weekend. It means you survived that double overtime thriller. The Columbus Blue Jackets won in Boston Saturday night. And then it means you survived the Battle of Winterfell Sunday evening. If you are a Game of Thrones fan, it means you know exactly what it means. If you know what I mean by surviving the Battle of Winterfell. If you are not a Game of Thrones fan, I beg and plead, please give it a shot. Look, I've said it many times here on the show. I've said it many times on Twitter. I am not anything near what you would call a fantasy genre fan. I don't like dragons and warlocks and witches, and I don't like the medieval battle scenes, and generally all this stuff is not my cup of tea. But I tell you what, this show is on another level. Fair warning, when you get started, it's violent, it's racy, there's a lot of gratuitous sex scenes. It's not for the faint of heart. It's certainly not for young kids. But I promise you, once you get through all those things, it's a little overwhelming and intimidating at first. There are a lot of characters. There are a lot of things going on. They have British accents. If you don't have the greatest audio in the world, you may not understand all the dialogue very well. It's a lot to take in at first, but give it a chance, get caught up. You will be glad you did. It's up there, one of the greatest shows of all time. Me personally, Breaking Bad is probably my favorite. I think for me, Breaking Bad, just because of all the cinematography, the writing, the directing, the photography, the acting, everything combined for me, I think Breaking Bad is 1A, but Game of Thrones is 1B, if not number one. It's an amazing show. It will, once you get hooked, you're really hooked. And there's a lot of things going on. It's all wrapping up. We're down to the final 3 episodes now with the big, long-awaited battle that went by Sunday evening, and I'm not going to spoil it for you, but this is something they've been pushing for many, many, many years, and we finally got it, and it was every bit as traumatizing as one would expect. So Game of Thrones, check it out. You got 3 weeks to catch up. I doubt you're going to catch up in 3 weeks, but the final episode of Game of Thrones is coming up in 3 weeks, and you'll be glad you did. So I mentioned the Columbus Blue Jackets. Mark Gibler will be coming up here in a few minutes. We're going to talk about the Blue Jackets, but before that, we will also talk Ohio State getting its quarterback, Gunnar Hoak, transferring from Kentucky to Ohio State, committing over the weekend. That is a big get for Ryan Day and the Buckeyes, as they needed that backup quarterback to make up for the loss of Matthew Baldwin. We're going to talk the NFL draft. Dwayne Haskins, of course, I touched on a little bit on Friday. He fell to number 15 to Washington. We'll talk to Mark about some of our thoughts on the draft, what happened there. And are NFL GMs crazy? Are NFL executives crazy? Are they putting too much emphasis on pre-draft interviews? And are they, trying too hard to outsmart themselves? We'll talk about all of that, plus Raheem Jarrett finally giving a commitment. We'll get into that. As I said, some Blue Jackets talk too. Look, I know this is an Ohio State podcast, but it's always meant to be also an Ohio sports podcast, which is why we themed it Unscripted Ohio. I appreciate your patience. I know some of you are not hockey fans, but what's happening with the Blue Jackets right now is amazing. This is a great story, playing Tampa Bay and sweeping the President's Trophy winner in 4 games in the first round. That had never happened before in the NHL. And then turning around and playing a really, really good Boston team it's one of the best teams in the NHL. And they're 1-1, coming back to Columbus for Game 3 at Nationwide Arena on Tuesday. That's going to be a crazy atmosphere. this was potentially an amazing story, not just for hockey, but not just for sports, but for the city of Columbus. It is a major league pro sport, Big Four franchise here in Columbus, Ohio, that we have to root for. And not only are they shocking the world, but shocking the city, but I mean, they're a legitimately great team. And this is a great story. I hope you will get on board with the Blue Jackets here the rest of the playoffs. And maybe, who knows, maybe you'll get hooked on hockey. Playoff hockey is a whole different thing. Regular season hockey is great, especially in person. I know it's not the greatest to watch on television, but it's a great sport to watch in person, especially playoff hockey. So I hope you'll get hooked and maybe become a season ticket holder. Maybe you'll want to go from here and become a Blue Jackets fan and go all in. But so we've got plenty to talk about here with Mark. We've got Gunnar Hoak, we've got draft stuff, we've got Rakeem Jarrett, and some CBJ talk. Before we get rolling with Mark, I will remind you that the Unscripted Ohio podcast is brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com as well as JFQ Lending. With support by GoBus, Ohio's rural intercity bus system can bring you to Columbus for Ohio State sporting events with over 40 stops to locations across the state. Visit them at ridegobus.com or call 1-888-95-GO-BUS. That's ridegobus.com or 1-888-95-GO-BUS.
It's time to go inside Ohio State recruiting and take a peek behind the scenes with Buckeye Grove recruiting guru Mark Gibler and his magical orb of wonderment. They said it couldn't be done, but he's outdone himself once more. Back for another recruiting roundup.
That's what I do. I drink and I know things.
Yeah, we are here with Mark, and it's not going to be much of a recruiting roundup. There is some recruiting news we'll get into. Rakeem Jarrett has made a commitment. We'll talk about that here a little bit later. But we've got, I mentioned this earlier, we've got Gunnar Hoak to talk about. We'll put a bow on some draft stuff. And CBJ fever has hit Columbus. We'll get into that here later on with Mark as well. But Mark, it was a busy draft weekend, and, it's kind of funny because I just knew this was going to happen. I was trying to get comfortable watching the Blue Jackets game yesterday, and right around the time that the game was getting ready to drop the puck, we had some Gunnar Hoak news. He made his commitment official to Ohio State, will be transferring. So it never fails. Anytime something else is going on, we always get distracted with actual real news when we're least expecting it or hoping for it. But what's your take on Gunnar Hoak and his marriage to Ohio State now coming back home to Central Ohio?
Yeah, I think it's a good fit. I think it makes a lot of sense, certainly from Ohio State standpoint, because he's a 2-year guy. He's not a 1 year, your typical 1 year grad transfer. So it's kind of a Joe Burrow situation in reverse there for Ohio State, where they can solidify the quarterback room here for the next couple of years. I think I posted this on the site a few days ago. They liked him out of high school, but at that point in time, they were still kind of enamored with, I don't want to say the dual threat, because that's, I think everyone would prefer to have a dual threat in terms of, a guy who can throw and run, but I think just in terms of, I think there was just more emphasis on the legs than there is now when it comes to the quarterback position in the Ohio State offense. So they were pretty honest with him at the time. Urban Meyer, kind of sat him down, and Luke Fickell was recruiting him as the Central Ohio area recruiter at the time, and they just kind of told him, like, hey, we think you're one of the top guys in the Midwest in this cycle, but we're just we're looking for a little bit different style of player. So then he ends up, with Kentucky, but before he even gets there, Shannon Dawson, who recruited him to Kentucky, or had been recruiting him at Kentucky, left, and Shannon Dawson had kind of come from West Virginia, so he was like an air raid guy. So what Ohio State had sort of steered Gunnar away from, he ended up getting into at Kentucky, where, Terry Wilson is kind of more of what they would look for, a guy who's more of a threat with his legs. So it all kind of came full circle, and this is just a much better fit now than it would have been 2 years ago or 3 years ago when this was first being kind of tossed about, because there was no Ryan Day on staff at that point. Dwayne Haskins hadn't even committed yet at that point. They were, at that point they would have had, they would have already missed on Guarantano and would have had Tristan Wallace in the fold at that point. So it's just funny how things have worked out.
Mark, there's not a lot, obviously, to go on with Hoak as far as his college career so far, because he hasn't had a lot of snaps with Kentucky. But in the limited amount of videos I've seen on him and stats and looking at his throwing motion, and of course there's the obvious comparisons because he wears number 12, so that kind of helps the comparison a little bit. But just watching him, he does look a little bit like Baldwin throwing the ball. I think Baldwin's probably got a little stronger arm and maybe a better upside long term. But he does look like Baldwin a little bit from the limited sample I've seen. I'm curious your thoughts on that comparison.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Baldwin, at full strength, is probably a little more mobile. But the thing with Gunnar was he was always a very good, just a pure thrower of the football. Big, strong kid that could, put it on the money. That's kind of what Dublin Kaufman's offense was. That's what they've looked for over the years. They've produced a lot of good quarterbacks, and so for someone who's coming into an offense that and I'm sure they will use Justin Fields' legs. They're not looking, they're not going to go totally away from that type of thing. But for an offense that's looking more for kind of what they got out of Dwayne Haskins last year, it's a good fit. He has experience. He's got 3 years in a college program. He has played in game. Meaningful snaps. He got thrown into a couple of games last year. I think once due to injury and once due to poor performance by the starter. So he's got snaps. For 2019, is it a better option than Baldwin? I think you could argue that it is for 2019, just because Baldwin's started 15 games in his high school college career. He was a 1-year high school starter. He's got an ACL injury he's coming off of. No college snaps of any. Didn't redshirted last year. They had shelved him until I think late fall, early winter. So may give you a little more upside out of the backup position this year. Again, not as much long-term upside as Baldwin, but it makes sense to me. It makes a lot of sense.
There was a lot of concern, obviously, when Baldwin announced his transfers and people were really freaking out. But, this did work out for Ohio State. And, this may be a situation where I don't want to take credit away from Ryan Day, but this kind of fell into Ohio State's lap, just because of the geographical advantage that Ohio State had in this kid growing up an Ohio State fan. I'm curious, what is the expectation? I assume he knows the deal here. He knows that, maybe he's hoping to come in and battle for the starting position, but I assume he understands that more than likely he's coming here to be Justin Fields' backup. Do you get that sense that, he understands the deal?
Well, I in talking to the family about it, over the last several days, I think what was being pushed was that, look, obviously Justin Fields is a guy that, they really like and certainly, is going to have the inside track, but they want him to be pushed. I think they, we've talked about how it would take, almost an earth-shattering thing for Fields not to be the starter. This was when, this from the day he was brought in, but at the same time, they've really kind of hammered home, we want you to push Justin Fields. We don't want you to necessarily come in with the mindset that you're the backup. We want you to come in and make this a competitive room. So, I don't think, certainly I think it's understood that Fields is a very heavy betting favorite to be the starter. but there was, some talk about just, making sure there's a healthy competition in that room, and that, he does come in with the mindset of, hey, I'm going to push for time. And again, what I've said is with Fields' legs, I mean, you're going to have to use his legs. He's too talented of a runner not to, but that also lends itself to more contact. And, you're also pitching the look. I mean, if you're not starting, you're one play away for a guy who runs the football a lot. So, I think it is understood that, it's a long shot as a starter, but it's also, I don't think they want that mindset, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. So Mark, I want to switch gears here to the NFL draft. We'll go from the current Ohio State quarterbacking situation to the old situation. Dwayne Haskins getting drafted over the weekend. I talked about, Haskins going in the draft on Friday, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I want to ask you this because I pointed this out on Twitter over the weekend, and it just feels like the NFL executives are bending over backwards to try to be the smartest man in the room. And I don't want to criticize Daniel Jones, and look, I'm not going to write this kid off. Maybe he turns out to be, the next Peyton Manning, like they're hoping, like the New York Giants are hoping. Maybe he's a great draft pick and he's worthy of the number 6 pick. I don't want to, preclude that from happening, but it feels like the NFL, whether it's putting too much emphasis on the interview, the pre-draft interview, or just trying to outsmart themselves, are these executives bending over backwards to look for reasons to just use common sense in the draft process? Because there has been some head-scratching drafts the last several years by not just the Giants, by a lot of different teams, and I'm trying to understand what's going on here.
It certainly seems that way. I mean, it certainly seems like it's almost like there's too much time. It's almost like they need to have the draft at like the end of February or something. It feels like they've got to fill this 4-month window they have when you don't really need 4 months to do all your homework. And then it becomes, a thing of, well, we have to be doing something. So what are we going to dig? So we have, we got to dig further. We got to dig deeper because, you can't just set your board in February and let it ride until April. I don't understand. I really don't understand what the Giants are doing. But again, maybe we will all be wrong and they will have the last laugh. I don't know. I felt like Haskins was the right pick there.
Well, and maybe there's some, and I don't think that had anything to do with this particular situation, because I don't think there are any off the field concerns with Dwayne Haskins, unless you really want to stretch and try to make something of his dad's, phone interview. But there seems to be paralysis by analysis with the culture that we're in, with so many off the field incidents and the ultra paranoid culture of people screwing up off the field. I almost feel like they're just trying too hard to dig for personality, issues and character concerns. And like I said, I don't necessarily think that that's what happened with Dwayne Haskins. I think people are just, I just don't think they were exercising common sense with his play, but I feel like that's also playing into why we're seeing some guys drop, is they're trying too hard to pick apart personalities.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's like they have too much time on their hands between the end of the season and the draft, and it's like the further you get away from the season, like the more you get away from just the film and trusting your eyes. That's the only explanation. I mean, some of these, you see some of these combine questions these guys ask, and like baiting these guys to like react a certain way. It's just bizarre. It really has become almost a circus, the way the pre-draft process goes.
Buckeyes had 9 guys drafted over the weekend. I didn't think there were any real surprises as to where guys went in the draft, but what maybe was the biggest surprise, or, if you want to call it that, out of the 9 guys drafted, or if you include Dixon not being drafted, what was the biggest surprise for you with the Ohio State guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Haskins would be low-hanging fruit. I thought Draymond Jones would go higher. I think people around the program have felt for the last really 2 years that this guy was going to be a first-round pick. I don't, I think he, in hindsight, should he have went last year? I mean, he kind of, he came back and I think improved, but at the same time, by coming back, joined maybe the greatest defensive line class we've ever seen. I mean, certainly one of the best we've ever seen. I don't know if that hurt him. I know, I think he is one of those guys. I think it's got to be the right fit. I mean, he is not a particularly big defensive tackle. So, is he, or, would he be better suited to be like a 3-4 end? But I was a little shocked he lasted as long as he did. I thought someone would scoop him up earlier. That's probably my biggest surprise. I would have to think. I'm racking my brain to think about anything else. And,
Mark, going in.
So I guess we'll explore him a little later.
I heard so last week, I heard Mel Kiper. Somebody mentioned Mel Kiper had Mike Weber, number 25, on his running back board, and I thought at the time, I'm like, that's crazy. That seems way too low to me. And to give Kiper credit, I mean, he was the 21st running back taken. But even though that's about where guys like Kiper had him being projected, I thought the 7th round was surprising to me for Mike Weber. I really thought, not necessarily second, third round by any stretch of the imagination, but I was thinking he'd be off the board by the 4th or 5th round. I was really surprised he fell as low as he did.
Yeah, I could have seen something around the 5th. There's just so many running backs. There's just so. I just think they're so easy to find. I just think they're the most. I mean, it's biology. I mean, there's just more human beings walking around the planet that fit the physical description of a running back than there are that fit the physical description of an offensive or defensive lineman or even a quarterback. I mean, and then you get into this thing where there's so many of them, so then it becomes kind of a beauty is in the eye of the beholder thing where there's 40 or 50 running backs that you could have drafted. So now every team's going to have a favorite, and it just it's really a tough position. Unless you are just an absolute freak of nature, it is a really tough position. And I think every year we see running backs like, oh, that guy could have went anywhere between the 2nd or the 6th round. I mean, it just seems like a total crapshoot at the position unless you're a Zeke or an Adrian Peterson or something.
It really has been devalued now because it's not just that teams don't see running backs as being important, but now most teams are actually splitting carries a lot more than they ever have. So there really isn't reason to invest a lot of draft resources into a good running back unless, like you mentioned, unless they're just really, really good, like Ezekiel Elliott going top 5 because he was considered a generational type of talent. So the Cowboys were willing to invest a high pick in him. But generally, most guys are just not worth that type of pick anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and you can certainly you can point to teams that like the Rams with Todd Gurley where it's worked for them, but we see teams constantly getting to and winning the Super Bowl with just either a whole backfield by committee or a couple of running backs who were mid-round draft picks. I think historically, if you really look at it, there is very little to no correlation between Hall of Fame running backs and Super Bowl championships. If you actually look at the top 10 or 15 running backs of all time, you will find a whole lot of guys who won absolutely nothing and didn't really come close to it. It's a lot harder to do that at some of the other positions. And I think with the short shelf life and the salary cap and everything else, I just think teams just don't want to, being an Eagles fan, the Eagles pretty much have a no running backs in the first round rule. I know they did consider Zeke a few years ago, but they are militant about it. And there's a lot of teams that are like that. And it's like I said, it's a tough position because you go to a camp and you see 10 guys that are all really good. And it's like, how do you distinguish one from the other too? It's really hard to distinguish one from the other. It really is. When you see these guys in person, it's just, I don't know. It's different than the other positions. Like when you go watch offensive or defensive line, like Chase Young does not look like even other elite defensive ends. Like you have certain guys that just pop physically that it's like, wow. And running backs like, oh, that guy looks like that guy who looks like that guy who also looks like that guy. And it's just, how do you distinguish one from the other?
And that applies. I mean, as you know, I'm a Bengals guy, and watching, they got Travion Williams of Texas A&M and Rodney Anderson in Oklahoma, both in the 6th round the other day, and watching the highlights of both of those guys, I'm like, look, I mean, these two both look like they could stick on the NFL roster for a long time, and they're both very talented guys, and the Bengals didn't have to draft them very early, so. It's like you said, you can pick up, and Mike Weber may be a great backup for the Cowboys down there, for Ezekiel. These guys are good running backs, and you don't have to draft, you don't have to spend a high pick on them, I think, to get production out of them.
I mean, look no further than the guy Weber's probably replacing, Rod Smith.
Yeah, good point.
Did next to nothing at Ohio State and gave the Cowboys a few really good years as a backup running back. Now, and I know like there's off the field stuff that goes into that, but like you can just find these guys at that position. You can't. It's really hard to go like find all these success stories like that with like offensive tackles or defensive ends. Like it's a lot harder to just pull a guy out like that out of thin air like that. You can do it all the time at running back. I mean, like I said, the Eagles, the Patriots. I mean, even like the Bengals, they've gotten, again, they got a nice little deal there with Mixon with his off the field, so they got some value there that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise had. But like, you can look all over the league and find teams with great running games that are comprised of all mid to late draft picks.
So one last guy I want to ask you about as far as the draft is concerned. So. Paris Campbell, one of the most improved guys for Ohio State this past year, one of the most improved guys in the country. I mean, here's a kid that, had a lot of dropsies and, they couldn't get Ohio State a couple of years ago, couldn't get him to, complete receptive pass, more than 10, 15 yards downfield. They had to rely on bubble screens to get the ball to him because he just wasn't making catches. But last year, he became a more thorough, complete receiver, got himself drafted in the 2nd round, will play with Andrew Luck over there in Indianapolis. I think that's a great fit for him. What do you see as his ceiling? Because I feel like he's still got a lot of room for improvement, but that's kind of exciting, if you're a Colts fan right now, because he does have a lot of room for improvement, and he's already shown immense improvement the last couple of years.
I think the most interesting thing to me about that fit, and I don't know if we're going to see that change the next year or two as Andrew Luck gets healthier or whatever, gets further removed from his shoulder issues, but they really relied on the short and intermediate with Luck last year. It just didn't look right going vertical with him yet. I don't know, like I said, the shoulder, I don't know if that's going to be a long-term thing where we've already seen the best arm strength that Andrew Luck's going to have moving forward, or if that's something he can sort of almost regenerate back into his, into his throwing arm. But so that's an interesting fit to me, because that's where Paris has kind of excelled, is, kind of the shorter stuff, run after the catch. So I think there's an interesting fit there. He's come so far, as you've said. I mean, he just unbelievable progress this past year. I am interested to see some of what he does. I don't know how that's going to translate. There's not a lot of 80-yard bubble screens in the NFL. It's a faster game. Like you have to be a route runner. You have to be a technician. You have to, it's really hard to just run around everybody in the NFL. So he's going to have to continue to kind of develop. I think the one encouraging thing for me was he became more of a vertical threat this year than it sounds ridiculous. Like to think that at one point he wasn't much of a vertical threat, despite how insanely fast he is, because he just had such problems catching the ball and tracking it and making adjustments and things like that. And I thought he got a lot better at that this year. That's going to be the area he's going to have to continue to improve upon, because I don't think, the bubble screen in the NFL is nice, but in the NFL, it's kind of a 5 or 6 yard play. It's an extension of the running game, and it is the same, I guess, in a way in college. But it's different speed of the game, and you can kind of, if you have a guy like a Ginn or a Campbell, you can run those plays with the notion that every now and then they're going to hit for a home run, and it just doesn't really happen that way in the NFL very often. So he's just got to continue to work on, being a complete receiver and just working all areas of the field.
Well, Mark, Ohio State fans will be interested in watching Paris over in Indianapolis. Terry McLaurin will be joining Haskins out in Washington. I know a lot of Buckeye fans are talking about, getting Washington Redskins caps and putting those on. Safe to say that you will not be buying a Washington Redskins cap?
No, Dwayne can throw for 5,000 yards and go 14-2 every year, but there will be no Redskins gear in this house. No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. But yeah, pretty incredible story. That's going to be a fun team to watch. I don't know how it'll translate to wins, but with Haskins and McLaurin and Bryce Love and Montez Sweat, who I think was a great first round pick. I think other than his medical issues, I think he was cruising for a top 10, top 15 selection. So Washington Redskins definitely had a very interesting draft. Will be a lot of fun to follow them. So a future wide receiver we thought could wind up at Ohio State. It did not. Raheem Jarrett finally got his strange recruitment out of the way and done with. And I say done with, and I'm using air quotes because
hang on there.
Yeah,
Careful now.
I'm saying done because I don't know that it's actually done, but he did commit to LSU, at least for now. We've said all along he was definitely playing games. Now, we thought maybe that didn't necessarily mean that Ohio State wasn't going to wind up with his commitment, but we were right about the fact he was playing games. He pretty much admitted as such on his tweet that he's since deleted, saying that he was trolling people. He's deleted that tweet, but he was basically admitted to trolling people. So what do we make of this? It's not like LSU came out of nowhere, but we certainly didn't expect that they were the leader at this point.
No, I mean, he lined up. Well, I shouldn't say lined up, but he got to the point of the process where he was going to line up all his officials and let his mom go see all the different schools. And he gets to that point, and the very first one he takes, he's off the board. So, I think certainly it's a surprise that he did this so quickly. There was going to be the potential for shakeup here because, again, his mom had not been on any of his visits. I think she had only been to Maryland to this point. And he, mentioned, he hadn't been taking her on some of the other visits, didn't want to drag her all over the place until the officials. And so there was the expectation that with that happening, there could be some shakeup because mom could weigh in and say, look, I don't, I like what this school does. I don't like what this school does. And kind of there would be some wiggle room there for some type of, dramatic shakeup. But it never really got to that point. So here we are. Certainly Ohio State, I would say confidence wasn't as high lately as it had been. There was a point in January where it was pretty much done, and it was just a matter of getting mom out to see it and sign off, and things just appeared to have deteriorated from there for whatever reason, and here we are.
I'm curious what you think Ohio State's mindset is here, because assuming that he's probably not done and anybody could probably still pluck him, in most cases, I think if you think a recruitment is on the up and up and it's a guy is straightforward, a team like Ohio State will still recruit a player like that. But when they think that they're being played with and a roller coaster recruitment where a kid is playing games, is this a situation where Ohio State would just say, like, all right, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. We've got plenty of other fires going on here at that position that we can worry about. Are they done, do you think, or will they continue to try to pursue him?
I think they'll try and stay involved in terms of communication. I don't know that we're going to see them go crazy there in turn. I don't know that he's going to all of a sudden, get back on the board to the point where he's getting the Julian Fleming treatment. But, I would imagine they stay in communication because really no one I've talked to feels like this is solid. I've had a few people reach out to me the last few days just kind of saying that they don't care what happens the next 6 to 8 months. He's going to sign with Maryland at the very end. So there's all sorts of differing opinions on there, on this one. So I think they'll stay in communication enough to where, it doesn't just completely disintegrate. But, they're operating from a pretty good spot right now. They do have 2 receiver commitments. They're in on several other good players. The wild card I think is Julian Fleming. I could see if they could get Julian Fleming, I think they would back off a lot of guys. I think that would be something that could change kind of how they approach things. I really do. I think if they were able to get Julian Fleming at some point, that they would then really back off. But until Fleming, decides, until Marcus Rosenme decides, LV Bunkley Shelton, there's no harm really in just keeping up communication. And, to your point about, kind of the misdirection and things like that can go on, just because they're communicating with them doesn't mean they have to take everything serious. I think they can operate. I think they can keep the lines of communication open, but at the same time operate under the assumption that, okay, we can't really, we kind of have to take everything with a grain of salt type of deal. I think you can do both. Yeah,
that'll be an interesting recruitment to watch, whether Ohio State stays involved or not. I have a feeling we're going to see a lot of twists and turns until next February, or I actually imagine it'll be February before we see him sign. Something tells me he's not even going to sign in December, but we'll see about that. So, hey, Mark.
I'm not sure what his enrollment status is. That would be the only thing that I would kind of question. But yeah, whatever the maximum amount of time he has to figure this out is probably the amount of time he'll take.
Yeah, probably. So we said last week when we were talking Blue Jackets that, I think we called this pretty well. We said that, I think most Blue Jackets fans would favor Toronto in a series just because they were a little more like Tampa, whereas Boston and Columbus were so much alike. And I used on Twitter Sunday night, I used that meme with the dueling Spider-Mans pointing at each other, because that's what this series feels like after 2 games in Boston. Columbus and Boston seem to be identical mirrors of one another, like we thought they would be. I mean, the skill level at the top, the physicality at the bottom of the rotation, the goaltending. Although I think Bob has been slightly better than Tuukka Rask has been through the first 2 games, and he's had to have been because I think Boston's had slightly better looks. But otherwise, these 2 teams are just so identical to one another. It's uncanny how these styles have played, and I think it has created this physical, grinded-out series that we've seen so far.
Yeah, that was a street fight last night. That was unbelievable. It's good they've got the extra day off, I think, for Game 3. I think there's going to be a lot of bruises that could use an extra day to heal. That was something. And the one thing, as wrong as I was about the first round, and as amazing as I still think that Tampa team is, you clearly, in hindsight, could take the fight to them a little bit and kind of get them off their game. Whereas I think Boston welcomes that. I think they got some sick individuals on that team that I think truly, truly enjoy it. And that's what makes this series so much different to me is you certainly still have to be physical. I mean, you can't let Boston bully you. But I just think, we're not going to see a situation where, I just can't see a situation where Columbus gets into their heads with the physical play the way they apparently did Tampa, because Tampa was, by the end of game 2, was losing its mind over everything.
Yeah.
They were just so preoccupied with the physical part of the game that they didn't even, they just got totally off their game. I just don't think that's going to happen with Boston. So I just think we're in for a 6 or 7 game street fight. Every game's going to be 3-2.
Mark,
it feels like every game's going to be 2-1 or 3-2 in overtime or something.
I don't know if you caught this quote by Nick Foligno last night, Saturday night after the game, but I thought this was absolutely perfectly said, and it goes to the point you were just making. It was because I felt watching that first period, I'm like, I almost felt like Columbus was trying too hard to be physical right back. I felt like they were not in a rhythm in the first period because they were trying too hard to play Boston style. Not that that's not their style too, but it's almost like they were trying to match big hit for big hit. And Nick Foligno after the game, I thought said it best. He's like, look, we just had to realize the hit opportunities will be there. We can't go into this game trying to seek hits out. We have to let them come to us. And he said, if we get hit, so be it. We're tough enough. We can take those hits, but we got to get back to just playing free hockey and worry about puck possession and worry about getting the puck into the zone and scoring opportunities. And I think he's right, because I felt like in the first half, they were trying too hard to show Boston, hey, we can hit too, and it doesn't bother us. But they were getting a little away from the skill part of the game. And it felt like, in spurts, they did better as the game went along. That's not to say it wasn't still a physical game and there weren't a lot of hits, but I think that they've just got to play their game and not get caught up in besting one another as far as big hits are concerned.
Yeah, I mean, there's really that is really well said by him, because there's no reason to look to make the game like it's just going to be physical. Like it's going to be that way naturally. So there's really no point in taking away from your offense to try and prove a point physically. Again, I think there might have been something to that in Tampa, because certainly they got them all riled up and off their game. But I don't think that's going to happen with Boston. I just think they would prefer it that way. I think the uglier the game, the better for Boston. And it's one of those teams where they've been good so far. Columbus has been good so far to keep it close within a goal, because it's just a different style. I think, when Tampa got up 3-0 in game 1, it was like they got so greedy and they kept playing so wide open that it allowed Columbus to get back in the game. Whereas, 2-0, certainly 3-0 against Boston is a death sentence. So it just, they want an ugly game. So it's going to happen naturally. And there's really no reason to, they just got to, Marchand, I don't know how you go 7 games against him without doing, taking your stick to the back of his knee or something.
They've shown a lot of restraint.
They've got guys that enjoy this.
I actually have been really impressed through 2 games with the restraint Columbus has shown, because those guys, they toy with you. They make your life a living hell for 60 minutes, and that's what they do. You get sticks, at you when the refs aren't looking. They jaw at you, and they're trying to get under the Columbus skin. And so far, to the Blue Jackets' credit, they haven't allowed it. It's a really tough team. And it's like you alluded to, these guys are sociopaths. They are a different breed of hockey player, and they thrive on the jawing and the physicality and trying to get you rattled. And Columbus hasn't given into it. But I want to ask you this though. We've seen a lot of great performances by Sergei Bobrovsky in the regular season. That game 2 against Boston Saturday night may have been peak Bob we've ever seen for the Blue Jackets. Would you agree? I mean, he was just phenomenal. That was
by far the best playoff game he's ever played.
Yeah.
I've watched every playoff game he's ever played. between my Flyers and my adopted second team, the Blue Jackets, I've seen every playoff game he's ever played. That was far and away the best playoff game he's ever played. And, he should have had that first one, I think, but he more than made up for that the rest of the game, because there were 2 or 3 at least that he made that probably should have been goals. So it more than evened out after it was a little nerve wracking when he flubbed that first one. I was like, oh gosh, because it's been so easy to this point. I mean, I thought he played well against Tampa, but I felt that after that first period of the Tampa series that they defended so well in front of him that he didn't have to make a lot of these brilliant saves, and that he was seeing a lot of pretty easy pucks come his way. There wasn't too much to it for most of the Tampa series. And then, you're in a 1-0 hole, and he kind of drops basically drops that first goal. Just off underneath of his glove, a little bit of a screen there, but he was unbelievable from that moment forward, and really had to step up in overtime, and a couple big ones in the third period, one or two in the second as well. I mean, it was, yeah. I mean, stop rambling here. I mean, it was by far the best playoff game I've ever seen him play.
Yeah, he was not just amazing on first shot opportunities, but watching him track the second and third chances they were getting on rebounds, sometimes from the opposite side, that's the incredible thing. He was stopping snipes from one side, and then it would rebound to the other side, and then he would slide over and, get a second and sometimes third block consecutively from the opposite side. And when you get a goalie that's tracking the puck that well, he's really in a zone.
Yeah, he's really locked in right now. I think, and the rebound control is good. The beginning of that Tampa game, he basically, I think it was the second goal Tampa scored in that game. He basically just flubbed one right in front of, for an easy tap in. And we haven't seen really that since. I mean, there were a couple last night where the shot got on him really fast, and he still was able to either steer it to the corner or really kick. You could see him just really push that right leg and kick it and get it way out. Nothing just getting left in front of the blue paint there. And he was really getting it out. And he seems locked in. And the presence, God, that crazy bounce off the ice, that when they flipped the puck in and it almost went dead right. Not only the presence to make that save, but that could have been very unnerving for him to see that happen. Even though you made the save, that could have been a very unnerving moment. And he just seemed to kind of shrug, kind of take a deep breath, and like, phew, that was close, and kind of move on. And also, again, just the mental toughness after that first goal, which probably should have been stopped. In the past, we've seen things snowball on him in the playoffs against Pittsburgh and Washington, and it didn't. He moved on. He moved right past it and made some huge saves.
I think that's the difference right there. I think he's still made a few mistakes here and there, like every goalie is going to make. But I think the difference is his psyche right now. He's bouncing back from those mistakes. He has the confidence going right now. I think in the past, that first goal might have gotten him off his game. It might have been a bad game after that. Or the Tampa game, in the very first, game one of the playoffs. And though,
the Tampa game, I was like, oh, here we go again. There was no doubt in my mind we were going down that road again.
But I think that's the difference at where Bob is at now. I think he is in a different mindset, and those goals that he's giving up occasionally, where that would have, it would have been it for him in the past. It's not bothering him now. It's not affecting him. It's just one goal, and he's on to the next. And that's where that's where his mindset is at.
And I think they're doing, and this is kind of, I think this is the most miraculous thing about their run so far. But I think they're playing very well in front of him defensively. Yes, there have been points. I mean, again, Tampa and Boston are probably the two best teams in the league. I mean, Tampa certainly was the best team. I would say Boston was the second best team. So they're going to push it. They're going to push in spurts. Like, you're not going to just go 60 minutes with no push. But for the most part, I think their defensemen have done a really good job of kind of clearing the front of the net, getting the pucks out when there's trouble, steering pucks to the corner, Bob's getting a good line of sight. They're doing a really good job in front of him. And that's a miraculous thing to say when you think of who they're putting on the ice.
They're doing it with the 7th, 8th, and 9th defenseman.
An AHL player, essentially. Harrington's been on the team all year. Scott Harrington has gotten every ounce of talent out of him that he can get. He's at best a number 6 defenseman in the NHL. Dean Kukan was a non-starter for this team for most of the year. Half of their defense core is out. Yeah. And they've got these 3 guys in here who would be a really good, AHL defensive core, but these are not all-star defensemen, and that's half of their and they're all playing these guys have done an amazing job. Like Adam Clendening's been amazing when you consider he basically didn't play all year for this team.
Yeah, it's incredible that they're doing it, like you mentioned, the bottom half of their defensemen. And for people that have not followed hockey a lot, you generally have 6 defensemen in your rotation. And the Blue Jackets' 4th, 5th, and 6th defensive guys are basically hurt right now. You could argue actually the third, Ryan Murray may be the 3rd best, but he's out right now. Who knows when he's going to be back? Adam McQuaid, who they acquired from the Rangers at the deadline, he's hurt. Marcus Nudavara, of course, got the concussion in Game 2 of the first round series against Tampa Bay. He's still hurt, although they are hoping he'll be back sometime this series, maybe even Game 3 on Tuesday night. And then Gavrikov, this young Russian that they just signed, might be making his debut. But anyway, they're playing with backup defensemen. And they're doing really well with these guys. So it's incredible to see that they already beat the best team in the league. And like you said, Boston is probably the 2nd or 3rd best team in the league. And they've got this series 1-1. It's incredible how they're playing with this kind of banged up depth on the defensive side.
Yeah, and of course, since we are an Ohio State podcast, I would just kind of make an Ohio State comparison of what it reminds me of. I've always said one of the biggest upsets in sports I've ever seen was the night in New Orleans when Jacoby Boren manhandled A'Shawn Robinson, which is one of the biggest physical upsets in the history of mankind. Jacoby Boren is a tiny little offensive lineman, and A'Shawn Robinson is exactly what you would build a nose tackle to look like. And Jacoby Boren dominated that matchup. And now we're seeing to think that a Scott Harrington could go toe to toe with Patrice Bergeron's line or Steven Stamkos' line and not hurt the Blue Jackets, and in fact provide something to the Blue Jackets was unthinkable to me at the beginning of the playoffs. And it's happening. So I don't know if this can last. We're 6 games in, and they're holding up. Hopefully Nudavara comes back, and would be. I've kind of given up hope on Ryan Murray, but I guess you never know. But it's been crazy. It's been a huge upset just for those couple individual defensemen to be holding up against some of the players they're playing against.
So, Mark, I want to wind down our CBJ discussion with this. And if you're free, if you're listening to this, please hit me up on Twitter at KYLAM8. I'm curious your discussion on this because I've seen a lot of discussion. There are some Blue Jackets fans that maybe want more Ohio State fans to get involved here down the stretch run. And there are some Ohio State fans that aren't hockey fans that, maybe bristle at the notion that some dual fans of both, are saying that they would rather see a Stanley Cup. And I kind of look at it like this. We saw an incredible number, overnight rating Saturday night, NBC. The Blue Jackets Bruins scored a 13 rating in Columbus for this game, which is really awesome for hockey. That's a great local rating for a second round game. So it shows that Columbus is taking a great interest. I look at it, Mark, like this. I think for fans that are both, especially, but Blue Jackets fans, but fans of both Ohio State and the Blue Jackets, this is Columbus as a city. This is the first real opportunity to see a major league sports franchise win a title. I mean, the Crew have won one, and I don't want to take anything away from the Crew, but as far as the 4 major sports, this is Columbus's, only major sports franchises, and this is something that Ohio sports fans in general can see something, in Columbus that has never been done before. I think that's why it's so exciting. And we've seen Ohio State titles before. So I think it's easy for an Ohio State fan that's also a Blue Jackets fan to be so excited about this. And I think it's cool for all of Columbus and Ohio State and all of Ohio to rally around this franchise. Because I tell you what, this team, it was a fun Cinderella story through the first round, but I think we're seeing this is no fluke what's going on here with this team.
What I think is interesting, the buzz right now is out of control. I mean, the 5,500 at the scrimmage, and just unfortunately, I've got my tickets. I am pretty much out of commission for they got to make the conference finals for me is basically where we're at right now in terms of my work schedule and getting the games. But it's just it's something the city's never really seen before. Again, not to disrespect the crew, but it's just a much bigger stage. They're going against great teams. I mean, it's not like they drew favorable playoff matchups. They're doing this the hard way. It seems like there's this feeling of optimism that wasn't, it's always been, oh gosh, everyone's kind of waiting for it to go wrong. I think it's kind of flipped now. And I think a lot of people are more in the, this is going to happen. Not, oh gosh, it's probably not going to happen, but I hope it does. I think a lot of people are really optimistic right now. And it's been really cool for the city. I think certainly the two, Ohio State and the Blue Jackets can coexist. I mean, we don't, I don't think we need to. It
doesn't have to be a contest. You can be excited about both.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's just been living here for, 16 years now since I moved back out here. I was born here, but 16 years now that I've lived here. And it feels like Columbus, since I've even come out here, has went from kind of a AA city to a AAA city, and now they're trying to show that just in general, not just sports, just beyond sports even. And I think it's kind of symbolic right now of what's kind of happening with the hockey team, because I think Columbus is a great city, and I love living here, and I think it's just come so far in the last 15 years, and I think. Like I said, I think this is a perfect symbol.
Well, and Mark, it has always bugged me when I hear somebody say, well, Columbus is just a college town. They're just an Ohio State town. And that's baloney. Look, we all know Ohio State is the bread and butter of Columbus. We know that. Nobody would argue that. But Columbus, if you look at the ratings, TV ratings for any sport out there, Columbus is a top 5 market in everything. It's always top 5 in college football ratings. It's always top 5 in college basketball ratings. It's always top 5 in World Series ratings. It's top 5 in Super Bowl ratings. Every single event that you could possibly think of, Columbus is a top 5 television market. People love their sports in the city of Columbus. So it absolutely does not surprise me when you get a great story like the Blue Jackets. This town absolutely will rally behind them, especially if they keep going in the playoffs. And, dare to dream, if they get to the Stanley Cup, oh my goodness, this town will go nuts for that.
Yeah, and I kind of need them too, because like I said, I can get to the conference finals. Southern Swing, which I will tease in the Skull Session, is upon us here very shortly. But I can get to the conference finals, but it would be one of my all-time thrilling sporting events to get, whether it's game 1 or game 3, whichever it would be to the very first Stanley Cup Finals game in Columbus. I have my tickets if it happens, and I will not be getting rid of them under any circumstances. But yeah, it would be amazing, and I hate to kind of kind of add pressure to this situation, but my goodness, if they beat Boston, are they not the favorite?
They'd have to be. They'd have to be.
Do expectations and pressure not shift dramatically to the point where, oh my God, they're the favorite? If not the favorite, maybe I think you could argue San Jose certainly would. If San Jose is still there, certainly would be a potential favorite as well. I think those would probably be the 2 best teams left, but. The narrative really would, if not to get too far ahead of things here, but if somehow they pull this off, the narrative drastically changes. it's going to be interesting.
Well, I will point this out. Before this series started, Boston was the favorite to win the Stanley Cup. And despite the fact Columbus was going up against the team with the best odds, and they were the highest point total remaining in the playoffs, Columbus still had the 5th best odds. So that tells you a little bit about, even though they were going up against Boston, the presumed favorite in this round, they were still the 5th best overall to win the Cup. So if they get by that hurdle, get by the Boston hurdle in this series, I think you're right. I think if they're not number 1 in odds, I think they're probably number 2, maybe behind San Jose, assuming the Sharks win this series.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at it from like a talent perspective, and this is coming from someone who, coming into the playoffs, and I'm still not sure I'm necessarily wrong about this little fact or this little idea, but it is interesting to think about it now. Coming into the playoffs, I felt they were maybe the 5th most talented team in the Eastern Conference. If you put their rosters on paper of who was available and everything else, I would have taken probably 4, maybe even 5 other rosters in the Eastern Conference. But if the dust settles here and they get through Boston, San Jose is the only roster I'm looking at where I'm like, okay, I may take San Jose's roster.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not taking anybody else's roster over Columbus's. Like, they are on paper are more talented than what's going to be left. If they can somehow come out of the series alive, which I think is going to be a bloodbath. Wouldn't shock me to go 7. I think it goes at least, certainly it's going 6. I mean, there's no way, right? It has to be at least 6. I think it's 6 or 7. But yeah, I mean, just not just they beat the 2 best teams and they're hot and they're this and they're that. They're literally, if you just look at the lineups, all the most talented Eastern teams are out.
Yep.
You know, and a couple of the most talented Western teams are out already. So it's crazy how this has worked out. The upsets this year are, even by NHL standards, the upsets this year were pretty unprecedented.
Well, Ohio State fans, if you are sticking with us to this point in the podcast, that means you have caught CBJ fever. I hope you continue to give this team a chance going forward. Make sure you catch them. They are back home at Nationwide Arena Tuesday night at 7 p.m. on NBC Sports Network. I promise you that is going to be the best atmosphere you have ever seen at Nationwide Arena for anything. It is going to be crazy. If you can't go to the game and tickets are sold out and they're going to be a lot of money on the secondary market, then by all means stay home, watch them on NBC Sports. Catch the fever. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll see what happens with the Blue Jackets. But hey, it's May, almost May. There's not anything else going on. So support the Blue Jackets and get in some playoff hockey. There is nothing like it. Anyhow, Mark, hey, so
okay.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for joining us. It's been a lot of fun. We will catch up with you for some more recruiting here in a couple of weeks. And, you know, as you teased, the camp schedule is just around the corner. So I'm sure we'll touch base with you on that. And hopefully, like you said, maybe we'll have some Blue Jackets discussion deep into the playoffs to continue with here later on.
Yep, sounds good.
That's going to do it for the show today. Thank you for giving us a listen. We'll be back on Friday. Make sure you listen to Johnny and Corey on Wednesday on the Scarlet and Gray podcast. I'll be back on Friday. Talk some more Ohio State football, recruiting, Blue Jackets, whatever else may pop up in the meantime. Catch me on Twitter at KYLAM8. Catch us every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com, as well as SoundCloud, Google Play, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. That's going to do it for me. Have a great week, everybody.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.